Don't think the Vancouver Canucks are the only team with some trade talk going on. We've got some Montreal narratives to dive into as well. Of course, some of these actually do involve the Vancouver Canucks, but we also are talking about some trade targets that have been, all of a sudden, linked to the Habs. Is Brendan Gallagher on his way to Vancouver? Can Kirill Marchenko come over to Montreal? Let's dive into the scoop. So we've been making a bunch of videos talking about Brendan Gallagher and a potential Canucks trade. It's been a pretty common idea over the past few weeks. And this was expanded upon even further when Brendan Gallagher himself made an appearance on Donnie and Dolly with Rick Dhaliwal and Don Taylor. Of course, we know Gallagher spends his off seasons in Tawasin, so there is a hometown element to him potentially getting traded to Vancouver. He said there's so much that goes into that, and it would be good for me and my family. Gallagher on the possibility of coming home to play for the Canucks and going through a rebuild. You know, when you listen to Gallagher talk about being a potential Canuck and just what that would mean, you know, all the sports cliches that we always hear about. Oh, what does it mean? How does it feel? How much I'm honored for this opportunity, etc., etc. When you listen to Gallagher talk about being a potential Canuck, this is a guy that genuinely seems to be willing to go through the hardships of a rebuild. And that's coming from a guy fully knowing that he is coming from a Montreal Canadiens team that not only made the Stanley Cup Finals 5 years ago, but also was 3 games away from the Stanley Cup Finals this year. Now, that's light-toting it up really, really hard because the Montreal Canadiens didn't really have a chance against the Carolina Hurricanes in the 3rd round, and Gallagher didn't even play in any of those games. But to go from one of the better teams in the league to the worst team in the NHL in Vancouver, and to see Gallagher talk about that possibility with such enthusiasm, there's a great human element to that. Gallagher is giving super responsible, lovable dad vibes when he talks about the Vancouver Canucks in this way. This reply from Dragon Was Slade says, Gallagher saying that he knows what this city is like when the team is doing well, while at the same time knowing it sure as crap isn't going to be doing well over the rest of his contract length. Another reply says, that's what you took from this? Dude, the guy's willing to be a part of a rebuilding team and to give the team culture and leadership. Shaming this is idiotic. With his attitude, I'll take 2 Brendan Gallaghers. The full quote goes as follows from Rick Dhaliwal's on Twitter. Gallagher says, it's a special place where I grew up. It would be nice if it happens. I'm as confident as ever. I'm not done yet. Now, whether or not he actually is interested himself in seeing through a full-length rebuild, Gallagher is 34 years old. He's only got another season left in the contract. Maybe it's not all too feasible that he is here for the long term. But at the very least, starting things out and getting that leadership core in place, it does seem to be an area of concern for the Canucks, and Gallagher is certainly one of those names that could help out in that respect. So it's really interesting to see him go out there onto Vancouver television and specifically speak out on being a Canuck potentially. I just wonder whether or not that trade price is going to come down a little bit, especially since Gallagher seems to only really be linked to Vancouver. Like, I don't know, we've been reading all these trade rumors. Elias Pettersson is linked to LA, Detroit, Montreal. Gallagher is only linked to Vancouver, and that's kind of intriguing to me. Does that reduce the likelihood that he goes for a decent trade price? Like Vancouver's going to have to give up like a third or something in order to get Gallagher? Does that increase the likelihood that Gallagher could be seen as a cap dump if it's only really Vancouver that he's linked to? Are there any other teams that are interested in taking this guy on? I'm not too sure. But speaking about teams that players are linked to, the Montreal Canadiens have their own fair share of names that have been in and around the block. And this is one of the newer ones that we're going to be talking about here. It's Kirill Marchenko out of the Columbus Blue Jackets. A super interesting name and a guy that I have been a really big fan of for a long time now. Marchenko was a second-round draft pick by Columbus back in 2018, and ever since coming over into the NHL in 2022, he has not slowed down. Okay, no, I take that back. He literally did slow down this previous season. He had 74 points in 79 games in 24-25, but 67 points in 76 games the year after that. Slightly worse points per game, decently worse points overall, and he did have 4 fewer goals this previous year compared to the year prior. So I guess there is some slowing down in Kirill Marchenko's game, but when you consider the Columbus Blue Jackets and the way their season went, I don't think it's all too unbelievable. Take a look at some of the latest on Kirill Marchenko. Friedman said this earlier this morning on the Fan Hockey Show 590 in Toronto. I wouldn't be surprised if the Montreal Canadiens were a Kirill Marchenko team, for example. Now, where is this coming from? Well, Marco D'Amico tweeted this out earlier this morning. The Montreal Canadiens were sneaky last year to jump on the Noah Dobson RFA situation with the Islanders. Kirill Marchenko, who is 1 year away from being an RFA, could find himself in the same situation. Sources say Columbus doesn't want to move him, but they are listening. It's something to monitor. I'm getting pretty excited, Marco. D'Amico then replies, that's not what my tweet should invoke. Yeah, so I guess there's a little bit of a water spilling on the flyer there, even though Marco D'Amico himself is the one fanning the flame at the beginning. Another tweet from NHL Rumor Report, Aaron Portzlin, who does reporting for Columbus and The Athletic. I've been assured that the Blue Jackets are not trying to trade Kirill Marchenko. The fact that he's been mentioned should give you an idea of the scale and magnitude of some of the trades that have been discussed, though, by Don Waddell. Which essentially means, if Marchenko's name is out there, it means that the Blue Jackets are cooking up some pretty big things and they're having some pretty significant trade talks, because Marchenko isn't a guy that Columbus is going out there and advertising as an option on the trade block. Hey guys, we got this dude Marchenko, his contract's expiring next year, he's making $3.8 million a season and he was a 70-point guy. Extra, read all about it, make sure you get your trade offers in. That's not what's happening here with Kirill Marchenko and the Blue Jackets, which means if any reasonable trade ideas are coming up here, you're actually talking about some really big things coming in return for Columbus. And if we're going off of that Noah Dobson RFA negotiation situation from last year, that guy went for Emil Heineman and 2 first-round picks. That's a really big trade package. Kirill Marchenko could honestly go for something similar in that range. I'd say a 25-year-old turning 26-year-old who can get 60, 70 points a year, maybe 80 points if he's on a really good team and he has a stellar prime season of his career type of year. It's possible. This is the kind of guy that I'd say is very fair to shell out multiple first-round picks for. And if reports are coming out that Montreal can be a team interested in doing that, then sign me up for that, eh? I'd love to see Kirill Marchenko on a line with Ivan Demidov. Just have that Russian connection going. At that point, it's like, who cares who the second-line center is? If you've got Marchenko and Demidov, 2 60, 70-point wingers, and then you still have Caulfield and Slavkovsky on the top line too, there is no stopping what the Montreal Canadiens are going to be able to do. So with all that said, you can let me know your thoughts in the comments. How do you feel about Brendan Gallagher speaking out about being a potential Vancouver Canuck? How do you feel about Kirill Marchenko and the trade likelihood that he ends up in a place like Montreal? How do you feel about these opportunities, these trade rumors? What are your thoughts on the trade prices? Let me know in the comments all your opinions. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.